Okay, hello everyone. Hello Logic class. Hello Internet. This is Mr. Rose hanging out late Saturday night, and we have a special surprise guest. As I mentioned in class, special surprise guest. Can you please say hello?
Hi. Yes. My name is Mike Rose. I'm Mr. Rose's brother. I am also a lover of philosophy, a lover of Descartes. I studied philosophy in undergrad, and I teach. I'm a physician, and I teach at a medical school. And I started a philosophy class for my medical students, for fourth year medical students, like a few years ago. And I actually teach Descartes, one of the Descartes' Discourse on Methods in the class as an introduction to the rationalist tradition, because that's, obviously it's a piece that has implications for mathematicians, for scientists, for really the entire philosophical world. So brother and brother have both simultaneously been interested in this topic.
We should probably say something about the topic, because I mean my students are not expecting this video on this topic per se.
Take it away.
At all. Yeah. So this is what is this video? I'll go back to you maybe for a second, but what is this entire video even about? This is about philosophy. This is going to be one of our most sort of explicitly philosophical kind of interludes in this class. And we're going to be talking about Rene Descartes, extremely important, influential thinker, mathematician, philosopher, scientist. And well, he comes up already in the book that we've been reading, Mathematics, Loss of Certainty. There's an entire 4.5 pages in chapter 2, where Maurice Klein talks about Descartes and his contributions to the beginnings of modern science and mathematics. And he's just so extremely important that we're talking about him in this class. This is a history of math class, philosophy of math class. So to some extent, we have to do some philosophy, and this is some of the philosophy that we're going to do. Hopefully, by the end of this presentation, you will agree that this was kind of like worth our time, and I'll try to make as many connections as possible between Descartes and Descartes' sort of achievements and thoughts as I can with like the rest of the flow of the class. So my brother Mike is here because
we should just talk about him. We shouldn't. I mean, we should discuss his stuff, right? Let's not put the horse before Descartes.
Okay. Woo! So that's
one.
Good. That's good. We didn't plan that. That's a live pun. Okay, so Mike, so you can make fun of us later or celebrate us later for the fact that I'm a high school math teacher. My brother is an infectious disease doctor in New York City, and yet we are somehow both teaching philosophy classes. And
to people who wouldn't normally be taking philosophy classes.
To people who wouldn't normally, that's right. To people who wouldn't normally be taking any philosophy classes at all. That is high school math students in a kind of a STEM sort of program, and you're doing these classes for like med students, basically, right? Are taking these classes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So also, I should say that personally. I am not a Descartes scholar, so I am pushing up against some of the things I'm less expert on. I feel like I'm very knowledgeable about Fichte-style proofs. I'm very knowledgeable about, say, Book 1 of Euclid, but I'm less knowledgeable about Descartes. There are other experts out there. I'm not one of them. So this is all going to be a little bit informal, although I think my brother knows more about this. He's just put in a lot more effort and time than I have into reading Descartes. So he is kind of the expert, relatively speaking, although I would say neither of us are experts. If you're going to take another philosophy class in your life, say in college with like a real professor, you're probably going to get some better stuff. But if you never take another philosophy class in your life, then today you're gonna learn about Descartes. All right, Mike, anything else to say?
No, let's jump into
it. Okay, so I feel like I did have something else to say, but I can't remember. Anyway, let's go. Woo! So we got a presentation here. What just happens? Is that working?
We see it, but it should be in presentation mode.
Sorry. Yeah.
There.
All right. So okay. So as my class knows, you know, there are all these student presentations, and once upon a time, students did them for every topic every year, and then I eventually just couldn't handle that anymore. So some of the years, this was a great presentation. Some years it was less great. This is the best one. No offense to the other people that did this presentation in other years. But there was a student, her name was Blue. She graduated in 2015. She took logic in fall 2014. And she made an amazing presentation. This is, in fact, only a third of it. And anyway, we stole it. I tracked her down this week. I got the presentation from her. So I want to give her credit because the slides are really all her work, and they're actually pretty incredible. And I picked her because she's very interested in philosophy, and then we just added a lot of things. So the commentary is our own, but the slides are 70% from her, something like that. Okay, should we start?
Speaking of blue, my brother has made me promise to not go blue, as it were.
Okay. All right, more jokes.
No
Okay.
swearing.
Oh yeah,
no swearing.
No cursing goes without saying.
It goes without saying.
I had to tell him that, but he's now telling me too. Because well, we begin. So I'm going to do a lot of the talking, but Mike is going to interrupt when I say something wrong or he thinks he has something more to say.
I'll just say father of modern philosophy. It's a little unnecessarily gendered.
It is unnecessarily gendered. People do say that though. Modern Western philosophy begins with
pivotal figure in modern philosophy.
Pivotal figure. He establishes this thing called methodological skepticism, which we'll talk more about. He is the kind of originator or something of the rationalist tradition, as opposed to empiricism. We'll talk a little bit about that too. We never made a slide actually explaining those two terms, so we'll just talk about it. And Descartes did a million things, but we're going to specifically focus on his epistemology. So this is the branch of philosophy that answers kind of like what can we know, how do we know what we know, and stuff like that. Okay, so all right, this is maybe a little bit silly, but we're in this class we don't have time to do everything. This is obviously not a comprehensive study of philosophy. It's not even a comprehensive study of Western philosophy. So we've talked about Plato in this class, and that's basically it. We're skipping ahead to Descartes, and we're going to talk more in subsequent lectures about two other important philosophers, Hume and Kant. Okay. Mike, do you want to say something about this, or should I keep talking? I'll keep talking.
The whole thing.
I mean, we didn't plan out who's going to do which slide or anything.
Oh yeah.
So feel free to take over. Otherwise, I'll just keep going.
I'll just say, obviously, there are philosophers in the medieval period, in the "quote unquote" Dark Ages, but there's in the sense of epistemology, like we said before, is the theory of is the study of knowledge, of what we can know, how we can verify knowledge, how we can come to something understood as true knowledge, and there was less in many ways. I mean, it was a topic that obviously people like Plato and Aristotle focused on a lot, and that became less of a focus, let's say, during the Middle Ages, and it started to ramp up, not entirely with Descartes. There were with the rise of science, people like Copernicus, Galileo, but also the rise of the empiricist tradition with people like Bacon, and so there was lots, but I think it's reasonable to say the kind of epistemology, the discussions about what we can know, with certainty about the world did kind of restart in a really focused way around the time of Descartes.
And we're focusing explicitly on Western philosophy, so we really are ignoring all non-Western philosophy, but it's still somewhat of a simplification. We're not medieval scholars here, but okay. Let's go. Here he is. Beautiful man. What do we have here? Let's see.
Should we start by just, like you said, we don't have a specific slide, in a very simple way to explain rationalism,
why don't you
empiricism? Okay, so I mean, you can spend years thinking about it, but in the very basic sense. So, because empiricism, we think about the empiricism from the philosophical perspective, right? When we think about, people talk about empirical research today, we kind of think about empiricism as kind of what scientists do. But really, from the philosophical lens, empiricism, says, what can we know about the world? How do we first ground our understanding of the world? And they say essentially, that's the senses. The senses ground our understanding of the world. All right. And so if we start by, what we can understand, what we can all see, and then therefore all agree upon, or can all hear, that is a grounding of our understanding of the world. That's not necessarily what Descartes was a rationalist, and they ground they feel can be certain about the world in reason, which is a kind of, it is a kind of vague term, but they're hesitant about saying this, that they're wary of the senses. They've been fooled by the senses before, and they don't want to be a fool again. So they say, really, we should use the kind of reason that we use to understand math. That's what we're actually going to turn to for some kind of firm grounding to help us understand the world.
I think your audio is clear. You don't have to hold the thing.
Oh, okay. So Descartes, as we'll see, is really jumpstarts the kind of rationalist tradition in the modern world.
Yeah, and we've seen, okay, so this is not a real serious philosophy class, but we did have a long one-day lecture on Plato and the Pre-Socratics, and we've seen already this.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about Plato because my brother has just taken an entire class on Plato, and he just has a lot to say if we let him. But
Descartes is very influenced by Plato.
Descartes has been influenced by Plato, I've been told, and we've already seen this tension between can you trust your senses or can you not, and if you can't trust your senses, what can you trust? Well, you can trust sort of reason itself. So that's the rationalist position. Okay, Descartes' contributions to math are huge. Of course, the Cartesian coordinate system that is named after Descartes. He is one of the founders of analytic geometry. So the entire approach, you can, we're going to talk more about this later in the course, but the sort of fusion of algebra and geometry, which is to say the process of assigning coordinates with numbers to points in order to solve geometry problems better. Descartes is partially responsible for this. It's also, it's really two people, Fermat and Descartes. Some people allege that Fermat gave the idea to Descartes in like a letter, so it's a little controversial, but a lot of the sort of standard notation, what we think of now as standard notation, is from Descartes. He invented the sort of exponent notation, which is standard. I believe he's the one who first establishes the conventions where variables are towards the end of the alphabet X, Y, Z, and letters are at the beginning. I might have that wrong. He does a lot of stuff in algebra. A lot of it's this work, geometry, that we're going to talk more about later, which is incredibly influential and anticipates a lot of calculus, actually. So, okay. Definitely one of the most important and influential mathematicians of all time. His contributions to science, Mike, I'm going to let you talk about this.
He's a real mover and a shaker. Is one way to put it. I can read off. So he's very influential in the field of optics. Right? Optics is one of those fields that, like, philosophers of science often will talk about as just like basically they just got it right, like, you know, like 500 years ago, and there's no research in optics because there's just like nothing else to say. And he kind of basically he like figured it out. He had what people call a kind of like he had like you know, the lines between, you know, we think of as science and philosophy were not as clear as they are today. So he had a philosophy that also had, you know, a kind of version of how he understood the kind of physical world to work. And people talk about as his view of the world as like a kind of a precursor to a kind of Newtonian view of the world, where so he espoused this corpuscularian view physics, so which was like, you know, a bridge from, let's say, the way Aristotle viewed the world. So I mean, Aristotle would think, you know, as one example, would talk about, you know, why would a rock fall when dropped, and it was about, you know, the rock had essentially a purpose, and its purpose was to fall. And, you know, Newton, we had understood, you know, essentially that in a very clear way is that it was acting according to a world of forces. Corpuscularianism, it also emphasized us, you know, essentially that we live in a world of natural laws, and it was a big shift. And I think in the Discourse he kind of emphasizes the importance of natural laws. So it's important in getting us close to Newton's view of the universe, which is one we kind of still, you know, share, but also, you know, he didn't, for instance, view a world where there, you know, God was doing things where there was no divine intervention. Anyway, but
yeah, no, it's actually it's interesting if you take a kind of a history of science class, which I've taken and Michael's taken. Yeah, Descartes like sort of extremely important, even though he kind of gets everything a little bit wrong. So he's just wrong enough on all the key points that he can be sort of forgotten, or he doesn't appear in the sort of science textbooks. But
I mean, everything we think is right is probably going to end up being wrong in the end.
Fine. Let's keep going. Okay.
Wait, so, should we take one more second just to note that you're not crazy. We do talk very similarly.
We do.
Like you've noticed.
I mean, yes, we've
noticed that we talk very.
Yes, this is my brother. We've been together his whole life. We shared a room. We have similar ways of speaking.
Okay.
So say people. I don't know. I mean, okay. Okay, let's go. I want to hear what Descartes has to say. And so we're gonna look at a particular book of his called The Discourse on the Method of Rightly Conducting One's Reason and of Seeking Truth in the Sciences. And yeah, this is a book. Here it is, right here. It is usually referred to as Discourse on Method. But you can see from his title that he's really going to talk about, so discourse on, a method that he's come up with. And what is this method for? Oh, no big deal, just the method for rightly conducting one's reason and seeking truth in the sciences. So according to Descartes, he's come up with a method of seeking truth and in fact finding truth. So
to his credit, I mean, he had a lot of, you know, he'd already sought and discovered a lot of truth at that time. So yes, he wasn't just speaking, he wasn't just whistling Dixie.
He was not just whistling Dixie. I don't really know. Okay. So I think he's maybe like 40 or something when he writes this, I believe. So he's already all these kind of achievements that he's famous for in physics and in math, he's kind of already achieved them now. And so he's now, in some ways, this work is bragging basically about all of the stuff that he's accomplished, and he's trying to convince you that actually the reason why he accomplished all this is not because he's some kind of genius, but because he has a method. And if you will simply follow this method, you can arrive at the truth in all spheres, just as he has.
He kind of says he doesn't say you should follow. Well, he kind of says actually explicitly, you shouldn't follow this method, but this is what I've done.
Yeah.
You kind of like
this is what I've done. Okay, so it's very personal. it's very it's a philosophical work, but it's also very autobiographical. He's going to tell his whole kind of life story a little bit and talk about himself a lot. So he's French. I guess I forget the exact story of how he ends up in the Netherlands. Do you know?
He's a soldier. He was a soldier.
Really?
I mean, he enlisted in the army, but there was no war, so he was just like essentially like he was born into a totally rich family, and he got all this money. He got a property that he sold, and he was just kind of like, busting about, like he had all this, and then eventually he enlisted in the army, and he never saw any actual fighting, so he was just like stationed in the Netherlands.
All right.
And
So this
should we
is
talk about this? He had this one. I mean, the way he tells it,
oh yeah.
right? Everything kind of started after this. Just he had this, not everything. He was already kind of like, studying philosophy and studying and thinking about philosophy and science and math, but that he just spent one night in this. It was very, very cold, and he basically had to like, he just had to camp out in this one stove. There's a room with a stove in it, and it was like lots of smoke, and it was a very, very hot room. And then he essentially stayed up all night with these like, had these crazy hallucinogenic dreams or whatever from this very hot stove. And then apparently, as he tells it, he kind of like, he comes out, the next morning, he basically had all the ideas, for like, all of his major ideas had come to him that night.
Outrageous, amazing. This is kind of the golden age of the Netherlands. This is when the Netherlands is one of the most wealthy countries in the world, and certainly has kind of like unprecedented freedoms. So he ends up here where you can sort of speak your mind, and he wrote it in French. He's French, so he wrote this book in French. It was typical at the time to write all scholarly works in Latin, so you could see this as kind of I'm writing for the masses or something like that. So it was meant to be kind of a popular book. This, as we've been saying, this is intended as kind of an introduction to all of the stuff that he's done. And so I kind of forget exactly the details of this, and I didn't research it super well, but I think the story is that he intended on publishing one gigantic book summarizing all of his achievements. And this discourse on method, which ends up being about like 50 pages or something like that, even less, was meant to be kind of like a long-winded personal and autobiographical introduction. And then subsequent sections of this grand work would be all of his accomplishments. So on optics, on physics, on geometry. I think that's right, Mike. Yeah. I like researched it. I guess who cares?
Move on.
But instead, the church was very powerful.
Yeah, at the time, he was publishing in his physics. He espoused a heliocentric, a sun-centered view of the universe, as opposed to the Earth-centered view of the universe, which was in vogue at the time. Galileo, like contemporaneously, almost published also a theory, and was basically of a heliocentric view of the universe. And he was imprisoned, or he was sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his life. So Descartes was like, well, maybe I'll just hold off on publishing that for now, and I'll just kind of put things out bit by bit.
Yeah. So this work got kind of split then into various pieces, which now then get published kind of separately. It's a standalone work, but you could also think of it as an introduction to everything he ever did. All right, let's kind of push on here. What are the parts of this work? Part one. And I'll just say, like, a certain kind of person is gonna just love this thing. So I recommend, if you're that certain kind of person and you know who you are, that you grab a copy of this and read it, because it is just absolutely amazing. At least you don't even need to read all of it. You can just read maybe the first 20 pages. Absolutely riveting. He is maybe the most arrogant man in the history of the world, and is an incredibly good writer. and is so sort of just like open and honest with his feelings and thoughts, and is kind of telling you what he thinks about himself and his place in the world. It's very interesting. He says everything 4 different times.
It's weird. Like, I think, right, it's like if you're like a genius, it's almost just like on some level you just have to, like, if you're just like an uber genius and you know you're an uber genius, it's almost more respectful just to be like, yeah, I'm a genius, right? It's like, you know, it's like one of those people who are like, you ask them when they went to, like, you know, they talk about when they're going to Harvard, but they're like, in my time in Cambridge, and they're like, great. They're like trying to like pretend to be humble about something, but he's just like, no, okay, listen, I'm a genius. Let's just go forward from there.
He does some humble. There's some humble things here and there, but not really. Okay. Anyway, what happens in part 1? This is called various considerations touching the sciences. He sort of rambles about his life.
Are we going over it all now? Should I? If something happens in part 1, I think it's important.
No. This is the overview.
Oh boy.
I changed this idea. We got to go faster. So in part 2, he introduces the actual method. So this is his method. So he explains it. In part 3, there's not much in part 3. He just decides, well, this method has shown me that there are certain moral rules that I've now deduced from this method, and the moral rules they're pretty boring. Obey the laws and customs of my country. Be firm and resolute in my actions.
Keep going.
You know, endeavor to. Okay, let's keep going. In part 4, he proves that God exists. So, you know, there we go. And part 5, he does a bunch of physics. And okay, he talks about the general laws of nature, about the moon, about gravitation, about the stars. He speculates about light and fire. And actually, what I find kind of interesting, and I remember this from learning about this in college, 25 years ago or something. He does this weird trick where he's like, he really, really doesn't want to get imprisoned and attacked by the church. And we're talking about like the Inquisition, right? I mean, this is the legit Inquisition. So he couches everything in this hilarious, I think it's hilarious, hypothetical, in which he says, what he wants to say, seemingly, is that it's unnecessary to have a God in order to explain the motions of the physical world, because God has established some sort of laws, and once having established those laws, he can sort of leave the scene, and we don't need God at all to explain why things are happening the way they're happening. But he's scared to say that, so instead he says, if God wanted to, hypothetically, and he invents this whole separate world, this hypothetical is, let's just imagine hypothetically that God had decided that he didn't want to intervene in the world, but instead he wanted to just kind of set the world in motion with some sort of physical laws, then he could have done that. And by the way, if he had chosen to do that, then actually the world would be very explainable according to these laws, and it's very much like our world. Mike, do you want to say something?
I think there's not enough information. I've heard this common theory that he's kind of paying lip service to the church, but I don't know. He puts a lot of
not paying lip service. He's scared to offend the church, and so
isn't that what lip service is? He's just kind of telling them what they want to hear.
Oh yeah, I guess that is lip service.
It might be wrong. We can talk. We have a separate podcast about what the meaning of lip service is, as opposed to what it sounds like it can mean. You had no idea, but wait, 2 other things. Yeah. One, part 4 also has the whole thing, the whole cogito ergo sum.
Is that part 4? Yeah,
that's part 4. So you skip that. Right. That's the big thing. Let's go forward.
Let's keep going. All right, part 1. All right. So whether this is a good idea or not, who can say? I'd like us to like read some Descartes. And okay, I could assign it to be read, but more fun if I just read it aloud. So here we go. This is from the autobiographical portion of Discourse on Method. And if this gets too out of control, Michael might cut me off and just be like, okay, we've heard enough. But here we go. This is Descartes. From my childhood, I lived in a world of books, and since I was taught that by their help I could gain a clear and assured knowledge of everything useful in life, I was eager to learn from them. But as soon as I had finished the course of studies, which usually admits one to the ranks of the learned, I changed my opinion completely. For I found myself saddled with so many doubts and errors that I seemed to have gained nothing in trying to educate myself, unless it was to discover more and more how fully ignorant I was. Okay, so Descartes is kind of spinning this sort of tale that he's sort of learning and learning and learning, but he now he's overcome with doubts about everything he's learning, and so in
I
fact
mean,
he thinks,
I think it's interesting. I mean, I think the interesting idea is to put a kind of historical context to it because, I mean, I think, right? I think this kind of seems silly now because now I think we all have some concept in 2020 of a world where, you know, the people on the left have their media, the people on the right have their media, and like, you know, like all education, all things that we learn has some type of bias, you know, and that like you can read a lot of things and still kind of not know things. But I do think, I mean, the world he was coming to at the time, he was responding to a world, a type of world that was coming to an end, which was that there was a standard system of education that you learned, that you submitted yourself to, and that you there, and then you came away, and then this was just the what you had to know about the world, and then you came away, and then you were learned. But he was starting to be like, but there, you know, emerging at the time was there were just a lot of things happening, right? This is the kind of beginning of the Enlightenment. So there was the emergence of this kind of empiricist tradition. There was, there was the Copernican revolution, and then Galileo, and there was just the Protestant Reformation. So all of a sudden there were people saying that God didn't, that there was, that the church was not the force. So there was, all of a sudden there were these rumblings of, wait, maybe there's not one unified, way to think about the world. And I think he was kind of, which I think we take for granted today, that there's not one unified way to think and understand. And
I don't even know. I feel like a lot of people do think that you go to high school and you learn everything you're supposed to learn, and then
but I think he was in a very explicit way kind of expressing something that was, an radical idea that was new at the time.
Yeah, it was radical to think that you should somehow not accept the standard curriculum or something. Okay. All right, so here he is speaking about mathematics. He says, I was especially delighted with mathematics on account of the certitude and evidence of their reasoning, but I had not as yet a precise knowledge of their true use. And thinking that they but contributed to the advancement of the mechanical arts, I was astonished that nothing more noble had been built on so firm and solid a foundation. On the other hand, I compared the ethical writings of the ancient moralists to very towering and magnificent palaces with no better foundation than sand and mud. Okay. He's kind of saying here that, look, he learned math, as a student, as everyone did, and he was incredibly impressed by it. He was delighted by it. He was delighted by it because of its certitude. And he's talking about Euclid here, basically. He's reading Euclid, and you can be so incredibly certain following the mathematical deductive reasoning of Euclid about the knowledge that you're acquiring. And he's somehow shocked when he says, okay, contributed to the advancement of the mechanical arts. He's saying that, yeah, if all of math was good for was like helping our science or something, that's sort of, he's shocked that that's all that we could use math for. And in fact, he was astonished that nothing more noble had been built on so firm and solid a foundation. In fact, so what he's saying here, I think, is that this way of doing math provides us with such an incredibly high degree of certainty that, in fact, perhaps we should try to build everything off of something like this.
And I think if there's right, and this is kind of the linchpin, right? This is where he's basically saying, the method, set out by Euclid, just, axioms, postulates, and then then using deduction to get everything else based on those principles going very slowly, deliberately. This is a very useful method. I think we should apply this to our entire understanding of the world.
And while we're talking about Descartes, maybe this is a good time to say again that, because to the extent that this is a history of math class and the history of the relationship with math with sort of the rest of knowledge, that we are seeing how the structure of Euclid and the axiomatic method that we've been learning about has been incredibly influential on other kinds of branches of thought in philosophy. Okay. When he's talking about the ethical writings of the ancient moralists, he's talking about basically like ancient Greek ethical writings, so Plato and Socrates, and it seems like they're all just kind of rambling and saying a bunch of stuff. So towering in magnificent palaces with no better foundations. What he's really complaining about is that, Plato, for example, does not ever list out explicitly his sort of axioms for his ethical positions of what he thinks is good and stuff like that. And he thinks that the axiomatic method, if the axiomatic method is the best, you disagree?
Keep moving.
Okay, let's keep moving. All right. So here he is, just getting very frustrated with philosophy, as you might be, as anyone who does philosophy should be. I will say nothing of philosophy except that it has been studied for many centuries by the most outstanding minds without having produced anything which is not in dispute and consequently doubtful. I did not presume to anticipate that my success would be greater in it than that of others. And further, when I considered the number of conflicting opinions touching a single matter that may be upheld by the learned, despite the fact that no more than one of them can ever be right, I resolved to consider almost as false any opinion which was merely plausible. So he's lamenting that philosophy is just a big mess, that all of the achievements of philosophy, unlike, say, the achievements of Euclid, are in doubt, that are in dispute, that different people have different positions, and that this is very sort of annoying. In fact, that because of this, that he should really just not trust any of them at all, and sort of hearing a certain philosophical position and finding it very sort of plausible is kind of not enough, because for every position there's this sort of
he wants certainty.
There's a lot of he wants certainty. Yeah, philosophy needs a Euclid, I wrote here.
Don't we all?
Don't we all? We all need a Euclid in our life. Okay. Okay. What else? So then he said, "Is this too long? Okay. Too much? Wait. Let me just do this fast. This is why I gave up my studies entirely as soon as I reached the age when I was no longer under the control of my teachers. I resolved to seek no other knowledge than that which I might find within myself, or perhaps in the great book of nature. I spent a few years of my adolescence traveling, seeing courts. Okay. This is a little bit silly.
But it's like if Mr. Rose is your teacher, he is telling you to free yourself of your teacher.
Yeah.
It's like, what's going on?
What's going on? Even? Yeah. So it's just like, stop. Never mind stupid school or whatever, where they teach you stuff. Don't listen to those people, man. You need to find your knowledge within yourself, or perhaps in the great book of nature. So you should be out there walking around, going on hikes, picking up beetles and cutting them in half and checking things out.
No, they need an internship now.
Yeah. Okay.
Wait, but I feel like the most important what did I say? One of the most important parts of part one was just whatever. I think one of the things that always strikes me is he said basically that there's just so many. I mean, we kind of already said it. There's just so many people out there thinking all sorts of different things. Like it's just great. Like he's just that some like, and again, I think of it, relevant to kind of the way we think today. It's just he's like saying like that there's some people like if you take any opinion, you can just get a handful of people who all have 5 different takes on it. So someone must be doing it wrong. Like the way we've all tried to figure out how to understand the world, there must be error. So he wants to kind of.
You should read this whole part one is 7 pages.
It's good.
Part 2. We're on part 2 now. He's going to introduce the method. Here we go. As far as the opinions which I have been receiving since my birth were concerned, I could not do better than to reject them completely for once in my lifetime, and to resume them afterwards, or perhaps accept better ones in their place when I determined how they fitted into a rational scheme. And I firmly believe that by this means I would succeed in conducting my life much better than if I had built only upon the old foundations. So throw out everything. We're going to start all over from scratch.
All those castles built on sand, get rid of them. Clear away the sand.
Yeah. All right, let's go. The thing which pleased us 10 years ago and perhaps will please us again 10 years in the future now seems extravagant and ridiculous. He's complaining about how things change and I felt that in all these ways, we are much more greatly influenced by custom and example than by any certain knowledge. What's up?
Yeah. No.
And,
So I'll just say, I mean, I think it's just, we should be very explicit about what he's doing. I mean, he's saying, basically, he's like, he says, I want to just, every assumption, every piece of knowledge. Do we say this more explicitly at some point? I'll say it now. I'm going to just, what he wants to do is say, I so much of what I know comes secondhand from this teacher or that teacher or this person, and really I can't have certainty about any of them. There's just so much nonsense within this system of so-called education. So I just have to just bulldoze it all, try to get every single premise that I've ever tried to base my understanding of, no matter how small. The idea that, he's going to go, well, we'll see exactly how far he goes, but he's going to say, I'm going to doubt that I even, have a body. That's not, I should just bulldoze that assumption. So he can hopefully get rid of everything. But he says he's not doing it for the purpose of complete skepticism just indefinitely. He wants to try to build things up to try to come to some understanding of the universe. But first he has to get rid of it all.
And in fact,
and then in this quote, I like this quote. So the method is going to be akin to Euclid, which is where he's going to build things up very, very slowly, based on indubitable first premises, right? And this is essentially what we'll consider we might as well say now what we'll call foundationalism, which is, so once we've bulldozed everything away, we're gonna find our first premises that, much like Euclid's axioms, things that and postulates, things that we understand, not because they're based secondary to something else, but because they simply they are clear and distinct and they're internally coherent. They just intuitively make sense, and there's no way to understand them not making sense.
Let's keep going. I think we do
okay.
have slides on that.
So he goes very slowly and he says, wait, but
okay, there's only like 2 more slides of these long quotes. We don't have to read these. I don't know.
But like a man. But like a man who walks alone and in the dark, I resolved to go slowly and to use so much circumspection in all things that if I advanced only very slightly, at least I would effectively keep myself from falling. So he's just going, you just go very, very slowly, piece by piece. You don't mess up.
And even if he's only certain about a handful of things, well, that's better to be certain about a handful of things than to be wrong about everything. Okay. Now here he is talking about math again. Okay, among the branches of philosophy I had when younger studied logic, and among those of mathematics, geometrical analysis, algebra, 3 arts or sciences which should be able to contribute something to my design. But in examining them, I noticed that as far as logic was concerned, its syllogisms and most of its other methods serve rather to explain to another what one already knows. So he's kind of complaining that, okay, logic doesn't help that much, really. It's usually when you're using logic, you're really just you already know something, and now you're just kind of explaining to someone else kind of why you know it's true, or you're okay. So you can't get new truths out of using logic. These long chains of reasoning, so simple and easy, which enabled the geometricians to reach the most difficult demonstrations, had made me wonder whether all things knowable to men might not fall into a similar logical sequence. If so, we need only refrain from accepting as true that which is not true, and carefully follow the order necessary to deduce each one from the others. So, I mean, he really is very explicitly comparing what he's trying to do in philosophy to what Euclid does in the Elements. He's really just saying, look, Euclid, he starts with these premises, and then he's almost from nothing, he just slowly builds, and you don't see the end necessarily, and the conclusions of Euclid are sort of not obvious at all, in beforehand or in retrospect. But because we sort of step through piece by piece and follow deductive reasoning, and we sort of can't make mistakes, as we go, then perhaps all knowledge. This is the dream, basically, that all knowledge can be structured this sort of carefully and with this kind of level of certainty. Cool. Okay. Okay, and here, yeah, maybe this is he's just saying, look, if everything's based on philosophy, and this was certainly true of the era, maybe even still, that if all the basic principles of science were taken from philosophy, and if philosophy itself is uncertain, then this is like the world's most pressing need or something like that. We should first establish philosophical principles, and only then can we move on to figure out physics.
Epistemology first. That's the
hashtag epistemology first. Okay. All right. So that was my like long-winded quotes. Hopefully, I've convinced you to read at least like it's literally 14 pages if you read books 1 and 2 or parts 1 and 2 of Discourse. I think it's really great writing. All right. Let's kind of like explain now a little bit more what's going on. These slides are now mostly all made by Blue. Mike, do you want to talk about this?
So I think again,
we covered this kind of.
Yeah, I kind of covered it. I mean, the idea of, I mean, he really is the, he really establishes foundationalism as a method of how, you know, a model for how philosophy should be undertaken for the, at least for the rationalist tradition. And so this is the idea of, so right, like we, again, and we've said it like probably 25 times at this point, but it's really modeled on Euclid. So you just you start with a kind of a rock solid, indubitable premises, and then once you've established that your first, you know, kind of first principles cannot be doubted, and they're just, you've crossed all your T's, dotted all your I's, and everything makes sense, then you move on to this kind of mathematical deductive method. You go from there, and you go very, very slowly, and if, as long as your foundation is solid, essentially your argument is going to hold. Obviously, there, you know, and there are other, you know, the kind of main competing way to, I don't know, think about, let's say, a philosophy of understanding the world is maybe a coherentism. So, right. So instead of saying, you know, I believe this because it's based on this principle, which is based on this principle, which is based on, you know, this undoubtable principle, you could say, well, I base this principle because it coheres with, you know, it makes sense alongside the way I also, you know, where we also think about chemistry working and physics working, and they, my theories go along with this, but it's not necessarily because it's based on anything. But for Descartes, he wants, I think foundationalism is the way he's going to go, because
all right, let's go a little faster through some of this, because I feel like we did kind of cover it. So
yeah.
What is his method of doubt? You know, basically
doubt everything
which is possible to doubt. Let's just put it in the false category until we've shown that it's true, and just keep on going, man. Just keep doing that with everything. I mean, the sort of, well, okay, doubt all of your senses, obviously, etc. This is methodological skepticism. It's a method of being skeptical, and hopefully we reach something which is indubitable. And we should say that Descartes is not a skeptic in the philosophical sense. There are philosophers who are legit skeptics, who not only are skeptical about everything, but have actually like ended on a position of, I am skeptical that we can ever have any knowledge at all. So he's arguing against that.
His skepticism is a means to building back up. It's not an end in itself.
Right. It is that's why people call it methodological skepticism. He's being skeptical as a means to an end, which is to eventually to not be skeptical, to know some things. Okay. Mike, can we trust our senses?
No. According to Descartes, no. And right, so he makes a lot of and I mean to some extent it's true, right? Like obviously we are all deceived by the senses. He says, right, so straight you put your pool what's it called, your pool cleaner in the pool, all of a sudden you know it's straight, but then it's at a bent curve, so it's lying to you. So it's a, I mean, and then, you know, whatever. There's also, right, the sun looks very small from far away, even though it's big.
So it's so
And
big.
we've all been deceived.
Um,
So we've all been deceived by the senses. So we've all
yeah,
dreamed and seen things with the senses of our dreams, in our dreams, and been deceived.
that's coming
So
in. But yeah. But
and
once, yeah, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
so
Um,
he sets this difference, or so he says, essentially our senses kind of tell us this basic, first level thing, and then it's our reason which helps us to kind of make sense of the senses and the ways in which, even though the sun might look small when it's because it's just far away, our reason helps us actually make interpret it correctly.
okay, let's keep going. Mike, can you still generally trust the world around you?
According to Descartes, no, you can't. Unfortunately, bad news. So dreams, I think, yeah, keep going.
Yeah, I mean, he's just, yeah, in your dreams, you can have a dream and then you felt real and then you wake up and it's not real. So then there are, lunatics who in reality, who are imagining all kinds of things. So we can't prove that we're not dreaming. And okay, I mean, yeah, keep going. So he proposes this thought experiment about this evil genius, and he says, okay, well, what if there's some kind of evil genius who's manipulating me? We're all in some kind of simulation or something like that. So imagine
The
this.
Matrix.
It's very much the Matrix. Yeah, I don't know. Okay. Yeah, but take someone with the power of God, but who likes to deceive. So sort of God minus the morality of God, and this person could trick us into thinking all kinds of things. Yeah,
I mean,
this is terrible.
this is his thought experiment. Um, this is so. I mean, this is part of the initial thought experiment where he's kind of now searching for things what that can't possibly that he might not be able to doubt. All right, so he's saying, so could it be possible? So he's thinking about things that he could doubt, and things that he could potentially doubt, and things that he can't doubt. And so, like, can I doubt my body? Right? And he says, like, yeah, I could imagine a scenario where I'm essentially, where what I think is my body is not actually my body, where I'm just some brain in an evil genius is that, and they're just making me think that actually what I'm seeing, the fingers that I'm seeing, the legs that I'm seeing are real. Right? After all, there are things like phantom limbs, or there are people who think that whose arms have been cut off, and they have feelings in that limb which no longer exists. And so, in the same kind of sense, you can be mistaken even about something as simple and straightforward as your body from Descartes' perspective, and he brings this kind of evil genius thought experiment as the most extreme manifestation of this.
Yeah,
This
I mean, this is all
ability to
kind of,
doubt.
and this is all a little bit. It seems almost like kind of a cliche, but I mean, he's the first one to do this, basically, to write.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Wow. Here we go.
and then it climaxes, and he's like,
okay, well, I'll let you do this. So, is there anything left? If I doubt everything I'm doubting, even I can't doubt my senses. I doubt even if my own body is there. Is there anything that is actually indubitable? Give me an axiom.
yes, Mr. Rose, there is something we cannot doubt. And that is thinking itself. All right. So if I'm Descartes, he's thinking about all this stuff. He's doing some hard thinking. He's doing some hard doubting. He's doing some hard thinking, and all of a sudden he's like, "Well, I can't doubt that I'm actually thinking." Right. So I'm thinking right now. I'm thinking. I understand that I'm thinking. Right. Because even if I'm doubting that I'm thinking, even if I try to doubt that I'm thinking right now, that doubt in and of itself is a type of thought. There's no way to get around it. All right. So if that there's no way to deny the possibility that right now I'm engaged in the act of thinking. And therefore, that is our kind of first, our indubitable, undoubtable kind of thing. That's
Yeah.
our first premise. Our
Yeah,
first.
this is our
There is
our first axiom, the one thing that
cannot doubt.
that you cannot doubt, the one thing that survives this methodological skepticism, where you should is that I exist. It's just kind of incredibly.
That I think. Yeah.
I think.
That I think. And therefore, because I think, I exist.
I am a thinking thing, I think he says. Or something.
Cogito ergo sum.
So cogito ergo sum is Latin for I think, therefore I am. It's actually kind of a little bit silly because he writes this thing in French. So it gets later translated into Latin. So it's the Latin that everyone reads, I guess, later on. This is kind of what's famous.
I think he puts it in Latin, actually.
Oh, does he? Maybe? I don't know. No, I think I read it in French. On the Wikipedia. What was he gonna say?
So the thing, I'll just say, because he's saying what really can't be doubted are both just that I have thoughts. He's not saying that my thoughts necessarily can't be, that the object of my thoughts can't be doubted. He's saying that I have thoughts. I can be thinking of a purple octopus. I'm not saying that that's necessarily real, but the idea that I'm thinking of a purple octopus can't be doubted. And that there is something thinking that so there's the object of his thoughts and the thinking person can't be doubted. Anyway, this is not so important. The actual subtleties of his argument.
There are some subtleties.
There's subtleties of unsubtleties.
I have never made it past around this section because anyway, let's keep going. Because this I also
I think this is the important thing. I think this is what he's using as his criteria is we've said it in a million different ways that they need to be indubitable, that the initial premises need to be indubitable, internally coherent. What he says is this phrase, clear and distinct, right? So
get out your thesaurus and just try to say clear, distinct, indubitable as many different ways as you possibly can. What Descartes wants to say is like, come on, I need one axiom. And his axiom is like, there's just some things that just have to be true because the idea comes to me in such an absolutely clear and distinct manner. And one of them is this premise. We've already talked about this in this class, right? That if you're building up some kind of axiomatic system, you have to start somewhere. You can't prove everything. So from what do you prove things? Well, there needs to be some, Aristotle says, some sort of direct knowledge. You need to if you want to learn about the world, then you can't do everything with deduction. So Descartes is kind of now putting his own spin on this, that his axioms are going to be things that are, he's just saying indubitable, right? The things that I will take as my axioms are the things that are clear and distinct, self-evidently true, indubitable, whatever. And he's really happy about this. So he's got one thing now. So, get out your notebook and on, on page 1, right? Like, I exist. And now that's it. It's okay.
Well, he's got thoughts, he's got thinking, the object of his thoughts, and then he's got that he's thinking, and therefore that he exists. It's like a lot of.
I am a thinking thing, he said.
Yeah, and therefore, and then again, okay, I think we're gonna get to it.
Yeah, I think we're going. Oh wait, detour.
So actually, hold on. Before we get there, I think we should talk about the dual. I think there's a dualist slide.
There's more of that coming.
But it kind of makes sense to put it here, which is just the idea that, right, and so what we've just talked about is, right, so he shows that you can doubt your body. It's at least possible to doubt that your body exists and that you are a thing with the body. He says it's impossible to doubt that you are a thing with the mind. If you're thinking that, if you guys are thinking that there's all sorts of problems with this, that there's lots of people who pointed out the criticism. I don't think we need to note them here, but this is his argument, is that it's impossible to doubt that we are thinking things. So therefore, one he says that, you know, firstly, we are primarily thinking things, that we're, as beings we're thinkers, we're mind, and that two, that our mind and our body are clearly two separate things. And this really sets off the kind of dualist tradition that will dominate philosophy, or will be argued against. People will argue against the dualist, the kind of, you know, and even if I think that for years, I think even if
So
people,
we should define dualism. Dualism
the
is
dualism is the idea that we have both a body and a mind, that they're two separate things, and they kind of interact in some mysterious way. And that, right, the body, that specifically the body is made of matter. It acts according to it's beholden to the kind of natural laws of the universe, to deterministic forces, to right, it has to do, basically, you know, it does whatever. Again, yeah, it's.
And wait, I mean, is it just correct to say that this is just the sort of default position of like Christianity, for example? I mean,
Yes, yeah.
In some ways, I mean, this is not new per se, dualism. It is the sort of default position of any sort of philosophical worldview that is.
I mean, I think I don't know if I can answer that. That I think he makes it very explicit in a way that as I understand it,
is it correct to say that all Christians are in fact dualists? I mean, that's just true, right? I mean that.
I don't know.
Okay.
All right, we'll talk about. But then, okay. Opposed to that, so then there's the mind, which doesn't have to is not beholden to any natural forces of the universe. It kind of has freedom, and so the mind kind of is something that acts voluntarily, and that the body is something that's acted upon. And this is the kind of dualist.
And just to repeat kind of what you said a little bit, this is his argument. It's kind of a subtle one for dualism, is that somehow that because you can doubt your body, but because you can't doubt your mind, they must be two totally different things. I mean, that's my answer. I don't think I would have understood that just from reading his text, but that's what all the commentators say about it. Okay. Hey, good news. God exists. And okay, so it's a big game basically throughout, you know, the millennia, the first, you know, the thousands of years leading up to Descartes, to try to prove that God exists. And it's hard to do. And there are all of these proofs that really belong to the medieval period, and Descartes kind of recycles them. This is called an ontological proof of God. So it's a proof of God not from sort of evidence or anything like that, but ontological is sort of the study of, I guess, like what exists or something like that. And so somehow that might not be exactly right, but okay, here's the argument. So it's logically possible maybe that God doesn't exist, but the idea of God presupposes that God is a perfect being. That's kind of the definition of God, is that God is perfect. So if a perfect being didn't exist, well, not existing is kind of like an imperfection. So that can't be. So God exists.
I think this is not even, he didn't even, I think this is from Thomas Aquinas.
This is Thomas Aquinas. Yeah, this is not new to Descartes at all.
But I mean, again, I think going into the details of this proof of God is not helpful.
I have not gone into details.
But it is necessary to his building up. I mean, he bases the way he's going to build up how we understand the universe based upon, and he gives about three total arguments for God, but he says that based on these initial assumptions, this initial starting indubitable fact, we can build up to an idea of God, and that God grants us reason, that God would give us reason, and therefore our reason.
Wait, isn't that coming? I feel like that's coming later.
Can be trusted.
That's coming later.
Okay.
So why is he talking about God at all, you might say? Well, is this somehow part of his argument? Yes, I think. So there's this argument for the existence of God. Perhaps you've heard of this before. I think this last bullet point, and this is my language here, you know, sort of define God to be just create a concept called God. What is God? Well, it is, perfect, omniscient, omnipotent, etc. All those things. So you haven't shown God exists. You just give it a definition. Well, God has to have, if God is by definition sort of perfect, it has all of the properties that a perfect thing would have. Well, existing is better than not existing. So if God is supposed to be perfect, then if God didn't exist, that would be kind of like a bummer. So God must exist in order to be perfect by definition.
It's a very weak argument.
It's a very weak argument, and I'm not doing it. I'm not trying to make it sound not weak. So maybe that's the most. Anyway, let's keep going. I don't really want to talk. Do you want to talk about this? I don't want to talk about this.
I mean, this slide belongs 10 slides ago, but this is essentially just, this is one of the things that this is from the Meditations, which is a kind of the companion piece to the Discourse, but it's a very compelling, it's his compelling explanation, most compelling for why we really shan't trust the senses, because he takes this piece of wax and he says he smells like he takes this piece of wax and it has a certain smell, has a certain taste, has a certain appearance, and he puts it close to the fire, and all those things, all those features of it change. That it melts down, it loses its smell, the way you tap, the kind of resonance it has when you tap on it changes, and yet he knows that it's the same even after it's melted down. He knows that it's the same piece of wax, even though all the sensory properties around it changed. So he's saying it's our reason, which is kind of superior to our kind of faulty senses, which allows us to understand the notion, gives us a better understanding of the world. Allows us to.
It's an argument for rationalism that if you, without some kind of reason, then as this object, which is clearly the same object, as it completely changes its appearance to us, if we were merely following our senses without some kind of strong reason underneath it, then we would conclude that it's a totally different thing, right? That's kind of the idea. Yeah, okay. Yeah, this is what we talked about this. Keep going. Good. Wait.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think we
move on. Yeah. Good.
Again, this is kind of important, but
push on.
Let's keep pushing on. Yeah.
Okay. Dualism. We already talked about this too. Yeah. Sure. Good. This is actually great. Let's keep going. So do we want to talk about this either?
Again, I mean, ideas have three possible sources right there, caused by physical. There's the.
Wait, I guess we should at some point. Well, okay, I think it's coming up in another slide, really quick.
Okay.
So there's because we're getting almost toward the end now. This is going on like an hour.
Proof of God.
Here we got another proof of God. Oh, I like this one. I didn't understand this either when I read it without reading what the scholars had to say. But
so this is This is.
You want to do this one?
I mean, it's again, yeah. So he says essentially. This is it seems a little out of order. My understanding is I think this is the first proof that he gives. So we have he says that he says the things that we can't deny initially is our ideas, and that we have objects of thought, and that we think that we are thinking beings, and that. So he says amongst his objects of thought, he has this idea of God, and it must be caused by something. So that's actually an assumption. Like this idea of causality is an assumption that he did not seem to eliminate in his whole project of methodological doubt, right? And this is a little bit of a spoiler. This is this is one of the things that Hume will kind of talk about, and he'll say maybe we should doubt causality anyway. But he says. But Descartes doesn't. He says I have this idea of God, and he doesn't. doesn't seem like a problem for him, but he assumes, at least implicitly, that it needs to have been caused by something. All right, that if he has this idea of a God, it must have been caused by something, and that, of course, if it's that if it must have been caused by something at least as great as it, right? It's kind of like, right, like if you're it's almost as a model for sensory perceptions, right? So like if you see a building that's far away, maybe it's obscured by like fog or whatever, but the building that you're actually perceiving must at least be as big. Wait, the building that actually exists must be at least be as big as the building you perceive. Some of it might be missing, some of it might be obscured, but the cause of your sensation must be at least be as big as what you're seeing. And he's saying that, so the cause of this knowledge of this perfect being must at least be as great as his idea of God itself. So therefore, God, he has an idea of an infinite, perfect, all-being God. So there must be an infinite, all-perfect God. It can't be caused by some by less perfect.
I mean, the really dumbed down, uncharitable way of explaining this argument is something like, but I think I got this right. It's like he has the idea of perfection, but who could have put that idea there except someone who is perfect? I mean, I don't know. It sounds kind of stupid like that. He argues a little bit better for it. Okay. Let's grant Descartes for the moment that God exists. Why is this important? Besides being just convenient, everyone believes in God. It would be great if God existed. So now that he's proven it, what role is this playing in this kind of system? Well, once again, I think I have this right, but right, if God is perfect, then God is moral, and if God is moral, then God would not sort of trick us like the evil genius that we speculated about before. And therefore, if I look around the world and I see stuff like trees and birds and grass and whatever, then because there is a God, I can trust that these things that I'm seeing are actually like accurate reflections of the real world that exists. Because if not, then it means that God has somehow set things up so that I'm being continuously deceived. That would be mean for God to do that. So since God is not a meanie, then I can trust that my experience is as I think it is. It's really just that, right?
Perfect God is the guarantor of our reason. Right? It's right. So right, it's like the way he puts it. Right, it's like our senses are kind of faulty, are just messing up all the time. Our reason steps in to kind of make sense of our sensory experiences. But like, okay, then what backs up that sense? What backs up that reason, which is kind of backing, like vouching for fixing all the mistakes of our senses. Well, this perfect God, right? A perfect God would not give us at least a deceptive reason, right? And so, I mean, problem is, right? Obviously, just it's kind of like what about people do make mistakes. But anyway, we won't get into that. The problem of error is a real problem, but
so okay, we're kind of at the end now a little bit. So I mean, we didn't make slides on this because I mean, frankly, I'm not a Descartes scholar. You've put a lot more effort into this than I have, and I would like to become some kind of expert on this or something. But I find it really hard because I find that this entire discussion of God to just be perplexing, bordering on almost disingenuous, and I mean, we should say that there are sort of interpretations of, if you go online and try to read scholarly works on discourse, you will find some people saying, oh yeah, just ignore all the God stuff, just completely ignore it. It's actually it's actually playing no role in Descartes' system. And in fact, there is all kinds of speculation that Descartes is like almost like some kind of atheist. There's like a reading of there's a reading of Descartes in which he is a complete atheist, God plays no role in his system. He doesn't want God to play any role in his system at all either, and thinks it's sort of unnecessary. And in fact, his physics is going to be one in which kind of makes God sort of superfluous to some extent. And perhaps even his argument, at least the part of I exist, is God superfluous in that.
I'll say, okay.
Okay, and I mean, so the climate of the times is necessary to sort of interpret what Descartes is saying. I think one thing is, without actually reading it, you don't get the tone of this work is, I don't even know what to call it. There are just extreme levels of irony going on. I personally believe that irony is dripping off of the page on almost every single line. And he's just really like shit talking nonstop about himself, about everything, even going so far as to, I mean, he doesn't want to get in trouble. He doesn't want the Inquisition to come after him and kill him and burn him, and he doesn't want to be in prison. And so he inserts, you might say, one interpretation is that he inserts all of this religious stuff as a kind of protection against any kind of attack, because he is, and maybe this is a good time for us to, because it's really only like 1 or 2 slides left for us to talk about. Personally, I find the Discourse and Method to be sort of inspirational and wonderful, even if I don't buy anything that happens in parts 3 through 6. But parts 1 and 2, in which he introduces methodological skepticism, is, I think, riveting. And I think that's actually the part which is so incredibly influential. So the very idea of doubting every single thing that you're not sure of and trying to build everything back up again was very influential. And it is a kind of almost a call to, if not atheism, it's certainly a call to ignore everything that the church tells you, to ignore all the sort of teachings, to ignore everything, the divine right of kings, ignore everything about the class system. You can feel free as a sort of independent, free-thinking person endowed with reason.
Your parents.
Yeah. Ignore your parents, ignore your teachers, ignore society. All of these things should be, if not ignored, they should be doubted. And if they're found to be sort of baseless or not backed up by reason, then they should be rejected. So this is a kind of a revolutionary call on Descartes' part. And I think such is the revolutionary call of the work that it is, I think it's vulnerable to attack by powerful elements of society, and in this case, it's the church that we're talking about. And so it's not unreasonable to see Descartes as having put in a lot of the religious content as a protection against this. And so you can sort of read through the religion, or that's wrong. I don't know.
I would say, I mean, it strikes me as someone who's maybe wrestling with the notion of faith. It's hard to say. I think it's hard to say. I've heard people actually convincing arguments from both perspectives. But I will say, one thing you could say is, the history of kind of strict, kind of religious Christian thinking is based, around a faith that does not require proof, that is just faith. So that he is actually that he is even fashioning a kind of proof for the existence of God, and that he sees that as necessary. Some people, will say that's even in and of itself the kind of beginning of the end of a kind of strict understanding of God. Though I don't know, there's a whole tradition of people who try to kind of
there's a medieval tradition of not taking God on faith, but attempting to sort of philosophize.
But I would say,
for example, can I just say one thing? The argument for reading huge levels of irony into what he's doing is that, like, even this is in part 1 or part 2, I guess this is, when he's talking about how you should doubt everything. You should doubt literally not only all of your senses, but you should doubt even if you have a body. He also says one thing you should not doubt are all of the teachings of the church and the church structure. I mean, it's actually like a kind of almost.
And like clearly people were doubting, and then people were famously doubting the church, and people who were famously prominently doubting it were getting in trouble. So yeah, there's definitely the incentive for him to be giving a type of lip service.
Yeah, so
as I understand the term to mean.
We're gonna look up lip service after this Zoom call. But okay, so whether or not you think Descartes was successful in building back up the knowledge, we should still applaud him for his approach to attempting to do it. And the part that I'm gonna just have to learn more about, because I really don't get it. I don't understand how you can. It seems from on the surface that God's existence is crucial to his argument that you can trust your senses. But other people have written that in fact it's not crucial. I don't understand that.
Yeah, I don't think you need. I think you just need. I mean, I think you just need a kind of. You need a failsafe, a way to kind of guarantee that your reason should be justified. And I guess
I think we should. Well, okay.
But I don't. It's a good question. I mean, I guess how do you construct that without using God? Part 2. We'll talk about this in part 2.
Okay. This is a silly slide I made. I mean, Mike, is this dumb? If it's dumb, I'll just keep going. This is what we don't want. We don't want skepticism. Can you see my mouse moving? You can, right?
Yeah.
You don't want skepticism. That's bad. That's just no knowledge. I mean,
some people argue
Descartes doesn't want it. Descartes.
This is Descartes.
Descartes is not a skeptic. That he thinks that that's just for sort of cynics. He wants there to be some knowledge. And so, okay, well, you can use your senses and you can listen to others, like your teachers and your parents and stuff. Well, then you're just going to get a bunch of false knowledge, and that's terrible. So instead,
the interesting thing though is kind of like to what degree he doesn't say this explicitly, because ultimately his third or fourth step or whatever is going to be, to some degree, using his reason is going to be a kind of way of justifying a lot of our senses. So the senses are ultimately necessary on some level.
That's true.
They're a necessary ingredient, but ultimately the part of humans that are gonna ultimately be the ones who had the final say is going to be reason. So it is so they Plato, again, who he's very based off of, he really makes it very explicitly, right? He says, like, he has like illusion, then just the sense, the physical world, and then above that our reason. It's just, he says, like, these are kind of the steps to kind of that we have to climb to understand the world as it truly exists. So he's not. I mean, I think he's arguing that the senses are. I don't think he's arguing that they're completely useless, but that whenever there's question between our sensory world and the world of reason, based, one where we use the kind of thought that we use when we do mathematics, reason is gonna bear us the best approximation of truth.
Okay. This is our final slide. I don't think there's anything left to say. Are we done?
Yeah, I think
we're done.
I think we're done.
Like an hour and 20 or something. Okay, good. Rose Brothers, talk about Descartes. More coming later, potentially. Anything you want to say, Mike, to the kids in the logic class?
Just gotta put in the time. Just gotta
put in the time. You gotta just read that Descartes.
Read that Descartes. 10,000 hours.
Okay. All right. Goodbye, class. See you next week.